So we're here today to celebrate Royal Rangers. Royal Rangers Awareness Week is the first full week of October every year, and it is to bring awareness to the ministry and what the ministry is about. This year celebrates the 60th year of the vision by Johnny Barnes when he created the Royal Rangers program in Texas. The Royal Rangers ministry can be summed up as an activity-based small groups church ministry for boys and young men. It's a mentoring program, a program to help the church's future men and leaders find their calling and to have the courage and skills necessary to combat the world around them. It's an honor for me to represent this outpost and for all the fine young men associated with it. And I'd like to highlight some of the outpost's experiences and accomplishments in this past year. The first group I want to talk about is the Ranger Kids. The Ranger Kids, it's a group of boys, grades kindergarten through second, and they work on the foundational parts of Royal Rangers, the pledges, what the different points of the emblem mean, and to live by the Ranger Code. This year they worked on family helper, family history, firefighter, and their clean body badge. The next age group is Discovery Rangers. And the Discovery Rangers are grades 3 through 5. And this group starts to discuss the Bible at a deeper level. They start to get into some real meat of the scriptures and see comparisons in different verses. We worked in some of the Old Testament, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, and then we finished the year with the New Testament, going through the Gospels and Acts. The merits that they worked on this past year were rocketry and fingerprinting, which you saw up there. We also did global missions. You saw the high tower, the towers were in there, and we also did the last one we did was rifle safety. You saw a little bit of that going on in there. The Adventure Rangers is the group that we just started last year. Commander Brian felt the call to step up and take on that age group of middle school age boys. And they get deeper into the Bible. They start to discuss things that are more pertinent to the situations they're going through the physical changes to the body, through the atmospheres that are going to change around them, where they become more social aware. And they worked on hawk and knife throwing this year. They worked on clean body. They worked on global missions as well, and they also worked on air rifle safety. And I'm also excited that this year we are starting the Expedition Rangers, which is a group of high school age boys. And this is the first time our outpost has had that here. And it's really getting into the Bible a lot deeper. And now instead of just getting a Bible lesson taught to them, it's asking them questions. It's making them dive into the scriptures, and it's making them reflect and see how the Bible speaks to them on a personal level. And I'm excited for this new age group that we're going to work through, and I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to experience amazing breakthroughs in these young men, one adventure at a time. So, sorry. So that's a little bit about what we've done here, and I do want to boast at one more thing. So we have an amazing group of boys and leaders at this church, and at the end of June every year, the district, Southern New England, has Ranger Fest. It's a huge gathering where they get fellowship, discipleship, they're fed, there's different activities and challenges that they go through. And last year, 2021, was our first year attending Ranger Fest, and we brought, like I said, 4 boys. And we finished 5th place overall. And I remember the MC at the end of the day saying, that he had just heard that was our first time there and that everybody else had better watch out for us. Well, they were right. This year we came back with 18 boys. We took 3rd place overall in the junior Bible quiz, which is a group of answering questions that they had a chance to study. And we took 1st place overall out of all the outposts that attended from the district at Ranger Fest this year. The men, young men and boys that are in this church are simply amazing. There's really no words to define the courage, the skill, the willingness, the love of Jesus, and the confidence in their faith that I wish as adults we had. And it's just truly a blessing to be here. So all that being said, though, we do have a need. For the first time since we've started as an outpost, we have a need for leadership. And because of some life changes in the season of the leaders for the Ranger Kids, we no longer have leaders for that whole group. And for the first time, at a point where I don't know if I can staff that position in order to give them what they require. And so we have 10 young boys that are potentially not going to have a program this year. So if there is somebody that has, that on their heart, and pray on it, that's not a reaction, that's not a knee-jerk thing, that's pray on something. If there's a point that you feel pulled to help in that ministry, you can reach out to me at any time. And not just for that group. If you think that there's something else you can do, let me know. But pray on that. And I will use that to segue into my sermon today. Even though they're very similar, it really didn't have to do with the other. That ministry is what that is, but through recent things, I've been feeling this pull. In general, I've been seeing not a coincidence, but the confirmation of the Holy Spirit through other people and having the same feeling. And as I look today, the message I'm going to talk about is answering the call. And I remember when I first started coming to this church, I would sit in the back. I always sat in the back. And, as a big guy, there's a couple of reasons for that. As a big guy, you always feel like you're being looked at, so it kind of just makes you feel like you're in the front. And I try to be courteous. I don't want to sit in front of people and block people. But I remember early on, it was probably for Rolling River Rampage. It was the first VBS, and Pastor David called up, anyone that was a volunteer that, to stand up. And then if you volunteered in any capacity to stand up, and I realized that the front 2/3 of the church is where everybody was standing, and the back third is where everybody was sitting. And so the people that were involved were the people that were sitting up front. And when we were in worship this morning, I looked around the church, and I'm not calling anyone in particular out, but maybe I'm calling everyone out. I noticed that really the front third of the church is empty. And I think that's significant. So I'm going to read from Nehemiah, if you want to open up to that. I read from the NIV because that's what the Fire Bibles for the Rangers read, and I like to stay with them. It might be a little different from what you have, but... So this is Nehemiah 1:1 through 11. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, "Lord, the God of heaven and great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant in love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes be open to hear the prayer of your servant who is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly towards you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, laws you give your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, 'If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king.'" So let's pray. Lord, Father, I pray that your word be received, that I speak it to these people for you, Lord, that your message is clear, Father, what you have put in my heart and what you put out of my mouth, Father. May it speak. May they have ears to hear what you have said and what you will say today, Lord. And I pray that whatever your message is for each individual in this church, Lord, that you give them the courage they need to step up to whatever the calling is in their lives. In Jesus' mighty and holy name, amen. So this came on me a few weeks ago when I was asked to help coach at the Burrillville Patriots. One of the coaches, one of the parents, Dennis Hawkins, asked me if I can go and work with the linemen. And it's something I used to do. I coached for 6 years at Burrillville High School, and I loved every bit of it. had an opportunity to win a championship as a coach. I won one as a player, and I won one as a coach, and I can tell you, winning one as a coach meant so much more than winning one as a player. Because when you're in the moment, when you're seeing it, the mentoring of these kids, they put everything into you, and they're investing it, and you give it back, and you get to see the fruits. You're not in it, you're outside watching it, and it's just such an amazing experience to have, and I've missed it. But through times, I've got a family, and I had other priorities and other ministries I had to take care of. But I enjoyed going out there, and so I worked with the linemen. They were having a tough time getting firing off the ball and getting motivated. And so, I go down and I run some drills and I start to assess things and I notice some stuff. And so, don't be afraid. I won't hit you down. And so one of the things that I notice is that they're doing a few different things. So when you're in a stance as an offensive lineman, right, your job is either to move people or to stop them from getting to the quarterback, depending if it's a pass or a run. And so the biggest thing is being in the right position. And, you always work with a nice, not too wide of a stance. You get a toe-to-shoulder alignment, and you sink down, right? And you've got good power, okay? Your shoulders are over, your knees down, your heels are planted, and I can be moved around, and I'm focused, and I'm in a good position. And when you're in your stance, you could pick rest. You're not putting weight down on as an offensive lineman because you need to be able to get up. And so from there, the first thing you do is you take a step, right? So you snap out and you take a step. You're going to take a step forward, okay? And that's what you're doing is you're engaging, but you've got to stay low. You need to be in the right position. And so when you fire out of that stance, you're here, okay? And your next step is just another small step, and you just go. And that's how you drive a defensive lineman away, all right? One small step at a time. But some of the things that I recognized right away is some of the boys, they would do a couple of things, right? So they would get in the stance, they'd have a good stance, and they'd come out. But the first thing they'd do is they would lunge out, take this huge, huge step, right? Or they would come out of their stance, and they would lunge, and they'd be like this, and they're leaning forward, right? And they've got nothing, and now they're out of balance. And so they're not in a position to move and maneuver and combat the enemy's attacks. The other thing that I noticed is they would take a wide stance. I know it looks silly, but there was one. Okay. And so now he'd get out of the stance and he'd pop up, but he's got nowhere to go. He's in this position and he can't really move forward, and he doesn't want to move back, and he's there for a reason. And so I started thinking about these things, and I started thinking about why they're doing this stuff. And, yeah, you're good. Just so you know, I didn't pick on Commander Norm. I was going to go with Brian, but his back's hurting. And so one of the first things I do, right, we want to be in that position. We want to be in a good position in which we can control the situation so we're not reactive. So I have this drill. Okay, it's called toe in the line. And what I do is I line all the boys up. They're all in the line. And I have them pop their helmets off, sit in the stance and put the helmets down. And on set hot, they do this. And they hold their helmets out, and they do this. And they sit there. And they sit there, and they groan, and they complain. And when I look this way, these guys over there are standing up. And then I come back this way, and they're sitting back down, and those guys there are standing up, right? And they're trying to see, but I make them hold it. And I see some of them start sitting down, and I get them back up into that position. And I see some of them start standing up, and I tell them to sit back down in that position. And I do that until they can hold that position for a few more seconds. And I really want them to feel that burn. I really want to encourage that. Why? Because that's the position as an offensive lineman you need to be in. Even when you're taking those steps, you're in this position driving the defensive lineman away, okay? And it hurts. But that's a position that you need to build those muscles. That's a position we need to be in to grow and develop into maintaining a healthy position going forward. So the ones that I look at this because I look at the calling, and I look at, sometimes it's intimidating. When God puts something on your heart, you're like, I don't know if I have time for this. I don't know if I can handle this. Who am I to do this? And I think about it. I'm out of shape, It's But I look at the two things that they do. And so, the ones that fire off and they extend all the way out, I feel like those are the people that they get so excited. They finally know what God's calling on their lives. They're going to give it everything they got right away. But what they find out is that when they're extended all the way out, Now they've got nothing else with them. They didn't plan, they didn't prepare, they didn't get in the position they needed and have the supplies and the materials needed with them in order to be able to take those good, healthy steps forward to the end of the play. And so, the ones that have these wide stances, they're doing this because they don't have confidence. They don't think they can attack the enemy. So they're putting this wide stance out there, hoping that if they give everything they have with a wide base, they can stop whatever's coming at them. And so they pop out and they pop up like this, and if they don't have enough, they're going back because they're not in position. And for those that put all this preparation to this wide base, that do have enough, look at how much bigger that first step is that they have to take. Instead of just moving up, moving forward, and being right underneath there and taking a small step forward, no, they have to swing out to get in line with what God's plan is for them. And for some of them, for some of us, that wide base, coming out of your stance and staying right here, staying stationary, not losing ground but not gaining ground, is a victory. And none of us should think that staying sedentary in our lives should be considered a victory. Glad I put a fan down here, by the way. So, I think of Nehemiah with this, and I think of his calling, and I think of what he achieved. And there's so much to it, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't know what's going to come out of me right now. I practiced this 7 times, and it came out 7 different ways. I wrote notes down on paper everywhere, and when I wrote the final thing up, I don't think any of that made it. But the first thing I want to do is find out who Nehemiah was, okay? So Nehemiah, he was a Jew, and he was born in Persia, and he was born during the time of the exile. So a quick history on the walls. King Solomon had built the walls in the temple. They stood for about 400 years until Nebuchadnezzar had gone and attacked and invaded Jerusalem, tore the walls down, tore the temple down. In that time, he took all the Jews out of Jerusalem and then put them into exile. And it stayed that way for some time until the king of Persia had attacked Babylonia and took over the armies and took command. And it was King Cyrus that had declared they can begin work back on the temple and that the exile was lifted and that they could start bringing people back to Jerusalem. And so the temple had begun construction, but they didn't construct the walls. After that time, Ezra had led another group of men back, or families back. I think it was 1,500 families, or men and their families. And then after that, we come to Nehemiah. And so he was the cupbearer of the king. And what that means is Nehemiah was the king's right-hand man. He was the man that was completely trusted in everything. He was the man that would have to drink from a cup if it was questionable to make sure it wasn't poisoned or tainted and it would affect the king. So he was a man that was willing to give his life for the king. And so there was a great trust there. He would have been with King Attis. I wrote it down phonetically too, but it's Artaxerxes. So he would have been with King Artaxerxes through everything, through some private conversations and through different things. He was an important member to the king. And one day the king notices that he's sad. And he says, "Why are you sad?" And he says, "Well, if it please the king, my people are hurting." And so you can see the relationship that the king had and how important it was that he would ask, his servant what was ailing him, what was bothering him. And so I think about the steps that Nehemiah took. So in what we read, you can see the steps he took for the play he had called. He grieved when he heard about the wall. He grieved when he heard about the Jews and the people that were left in Jerusalem and how they were suffering daily. And he cried. He wept, and he fasted, and he prayed. And I think about that as the first, when we have a calling in our lives, that's the first steps that we should take. Like, find out what is on our heart and seek counsel of God. Find out what he's placing on our heart. Find out what he's got. So I look at it, and he's, his stance is that he's, he's sad, he's down, right? But he seeks the counsel, and that's his first step. Okay, that's that first power step. The next thing that he does is he reaches out to his king, and he says, this is bothering me, and I'd like to go and help build the walls. So the next step, right? So he seeks counsel of God. The next step now is that, he's already taken that first step. Now his second step in that position is seeking the authority over whoever he needs to speak to, whether it's the lead pastor or if it's somebody in the head of a ministry. If we don't feel called to lead something, but we feel called to help, we go to that ministry and see where there's, a calling in that ministry. And so you go to that leader and see what it is. And the next thing he did in chapter 2 is he asks for letters because he's planning the next step. So he's already 2 steps in, right? And now he needs to get to Jerusalem. So what's his next step? He needs safe travel, and he needs a place to be. So he asks for letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates so he can get there safely, and he asks for letters to the royal keeper of the forest so he can get materials to build his place safe. And I'm just thinking of that. I'm just thinking of all those little steps, small steps that he was taking, okay, for God's plan that he had for this, to rebuild these walls. And so he gets there, and he builds a shelter, and he's there for a few days. And he goes out at night. And in the night, he inspects all the walls. And he goes through different gates, different areas, and he's looking. And he comes back, and nobody knew where he went and what he was doing. And he did this at night because he didn't want opposition to see what he was doing. Okay, he didn't announce. We saw in Joseph what happens when you announce God's plan for you to everybody. It makes some people jealous, right? And then the attacks can already start coming. But he didn't have any attacks yet because he was doing this at night. He was doing this the way he needed to do it. And so he figured out the plan, and then he reached out to the officials and to the council and said, hey, we need to rebuild this wall. And so the councils were on board with it, and they're like, yes, let's do it. And right away, people questioned him. Right away, attacks started. And I'm going to tell you, when you're in ministry, attacks are going to come. They're going to come left and right. Okay? You're entering a war, and that's how it happens. I can tell you full-heartedly, someone that's been doing this for just a few years, the attacks come. Even leading up to the service, the attacks are coming. I've had leaders that couldn't be here. I've had, dealing with Colin's poison ivy and wondering if he's going to be able to step up or willing to step up because I didn't force him, by the way. That is all on his account. I had no responses from people if they're going to be here. I tried setting up the board and printing some things out. My printer just decided not to work. I printed everything else all day, got to the first page, reset spoolers, okay? All of a sudden, important business matters that weren't important 3-4 weeks ago were important this week. That I had to stop what I'm doing in preparation and deal with those things. And I can tell you what, there were times where I had doubts. There were times I'm like, is this an intervention? Is this God's intervention, his interruption in my life, or is this an attack? And that's where I had to seek counsel. That's where I had to pray and be like, all right, Lord, where am I going? That's why I talked to Pastor Dave. I reached out. I said, hey, these attacks are coming. I don't know what it is. But man, am I on the right course? Because doubt is one of the biggest things you can have. But we're here, right? And so chapter 3, I love chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a complete chapter that only discusses the men that were involved, all the people, the families, and everything that was involved in rebuilding the wall. Okay? And so chapter 3 talks about the high priests, the rulers, governors, goldsmiths. And my favorite person that it mentions by profession was the perfume maker. The perfume maker was there building the wall. And so why I like that so much is it tells you that God can use anybody. What business is a perfume? If I was a perfume maker and you got to build a wall, you're talking to the wrong person, But that's not what happened. Everybody knew, and I feel like these people that answered this call, these people that fulfilled the roles and built, and they tell you this group built this and this group built this, and they're all specific. And I feel like they were in this position. They were sitting there in that position of uncomfortness. They knew they were under attack all the time, and they wanted to get out of it. And so they went through that season of building in their lives so that for this moment where they could just take that first explosive step and take the next one, rock by rock, step by step, they rebuilt that wall. And so in 52 days, the walls were completed. 1.7 miles long, upwards of 8 feet wide and 40 feet high. At least 10 gates and 8 towers mentioned. And I feel like this accomplishment isn't just something because it was a calling and it helped them, but it was significant. And it was something that everybody around them, the enemies that were trying to attack them, that would go to great lengths to threaten them and threaten their families and reach out to the king to say, hey, they're going to rebel against you. And all the attacks that they had that they've gone through, they said, too bad, we got a wall. And one of my favorite things that, as I read, chapter 4, verse 17, Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. There were attacks, and there's going to be attacks, but that didn't stop them. They knew that God was greater than any enemy that was going to come against them. They weren't stupid. They didn't just go about their day. They were prepared, but they knew. And so with one hand, they built the wall, and with the other hand, they had their weapons. And I think to some of you in this room, I pray that you don't let what's in one hand in your life interfere with what God wants to put in the other one. So God had a call for Nehemiah. It was Nehemiah's vision. And so he reached out. He's the one that had the grieving heart. But it was all of the hands. It was everybody mentioned in chapter 3 and everyone that's not mentioned that helped build this wall, that made this God's vision, God's plan for Nehemiah and his life come true. And so there might be some of you that don't think that they can lead a ministry or are called to lead a ministry, but think that they have hands that can help in a ministry. And it doesn't have to be rangers, it doesn't have to be girls, it doesn't have to be children, but there is a calling everywhere in this church for somebody. God has a plan for you. In Ephesians 2:9. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus, to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. If there's anybody in this room that doesn't think that they're created for a reason, for a purpose, that has a calling on their name, the Bible tells you different. Every person in this room has a purpose. Every person in this room has a calling in their lives. Some of you here, you're here for, you're searching. You don't know what your calling is. Some of you might be too busy or think that you're too busy. And some of you might just question, who am I? Who am I to answer this call? Who am I to lead this group? Who am I to help out here? So I used this rope a couple years ago. This rope is 168 inches long, and that's every inch signifies 1 hour in a week. And I use this orange stripe right here. This orange stripe is an hour and a half. That's the length of our meetings for Royal Rangers. And so I pointed out that this is the time I have with these boys. But there's all this other space. And as I'm preparing for today, I thought to myself, for those that think you're too busy, for those that think there's not enough time, or I just got to get through this and then I can help with it, just this next step, because I'll tell you what, I'm the king of that. If I just get through this, I can do this. And if I just get through this, I can do this. But let me tell you, there's always going to be something else. And there's always going to be a reason not to do something. But I'm calling every one of you out today to tell me that you can't put an inch of tape on this rope. That somewhere along this line, you can't put an inch of tape on this rope. When you look at your week, and you look at everything you've got to do, if you can't find an inch, I think we've got to reassess what we're putting our priorities in. For the ones that think, who am I? Let me tell you. Who am I? Those are the three small words that are the most dangerous attack by the enemy, the easiest way to pull at the thread to unravel every bit of confidence and doubt you have in yourself. But I can tell you, who am I? I started this outpost 2 years after being saved. I hadn't even read the whole Bible yet. Who am I to bring up the next generation of leaders and future men? Who am I? It's been said a few times, pastors use it, I've said it before, but my wife asked me when we first started, what if there are 4 leaders, you have 4 boys? And I said, well, I'll build 4 leaders. And that sounds great on the surface. It sounds like I'm, hey, I'm going to do what God calls me to do. But really, I was kind of like, yeah, 4 leaders is good for me. I'll take 4 boys. But that's not what God put on my plate. God gave me 14 boys and girls, because the first year we did this, there wasn't a girls' ministry yet. It was birthed out of this part of it. The girls came in to be leaders, and they saw the need, and they took that on, and Amanda rolled with it, and it's been great that that's there. But that first year, I had 14 boys and girls that I was responsible for. And I thought to myself, who am I? Who am I that's up here to teach these? Who am I to bring leaders in and create this program that I know nothing about? I've got stacks of books this thick and trainings that everyone is going to. I look at the ministry across the nation, and there's so many men that have done this for 30, 35, 40 years, and here I am, saved 2 years. God can use me. He can use anyone. So the last one I mentioned, the people that are searching. And I'm going to give you a moment. I thought about doing an altar call, and I'm not sure, if that's what's here, but I am going to give you a moment to respond. I'm going to ask everyone to bow their heads, close their eyes before I pray us out. And if you're searching for what God's plan is in your life, if you're looking for a calling, for a calling at this moment, if you're searching for that inch of rope that you can free, if you can figure it out, if you don't know where to get rid of it and you need God to remove that inch of rope out of your life, that you can put that tape on there, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and respond. I can tell you, there's been a million times I can say, well, I can use this as an excuse or this is a reason. And I can tell you times where I didn't respond and I heard God speak to me and say, hey, this is your time. You can't do this on your own. I thought I could do things on my own, and if I could do it on my own, it would have been done, right? I find myself in that position more often than I care to admit. It's every time that I respond, every time I seek God, everything becomes so clear. So I'll pray you guys out. Lord, I thank you for your words today. Father, I thank you for this service and for every man and woman in this church to hear your words. May it reach their hearts, Lord. May they find your counsel in their lives, Lord. May it free up the time they need. May it give them the courage to know that you have created them uniquely for your purpose, Lord. That there isn't one soul in this room that doesn't have a position in your master plan. God, I pray that they seek this in their hearts, Lord. I pray that they're unsettled until they find their calling, Lord, and that when they do, Lord, when they seek you, that they know that you will make their path straight, Father, and that they're guided and directed. Lord, may they be welcomed wherever they're called, Lord. May you provide them, as the king of Persia provided Nehemiah with armies and everything he needed to go forward. Provide them that they can enter your call. In Jesus' mighty and holy name, amen.
Hey, Pastor Dave here. Just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to our YouTube channel. Make sure if you want to stay up to speed with all the videos that we're going to post in the future, you subscribe to our channel and share it, get the word out to everybody. Lastly, make sure you go to our website. We have our DNA there, everything the church is about here at Glad Tidings Community Church and all the different ministries that we offer. You can go to www.gtcc.church. Again, thanks for tuning in. God bless you.